listening to the Retail Razor Show, where your expert hosts and their guests cut through the clutter in retail and retail tech to shape the future of retail.
Hello and welcome to a special Season 2, Episode 10, Part 5 of the Retail Razor Show. This is the fifth and final episode in our multi-part series recorded live and in person at the NRF 2023 show in January. I'm your host, Ricardo Belmar.
And I'm your co-host, Casey Golden. Welcome to the Retail Razor Show, retail's favorite podcast for product junkies, commerce technologists, and everyone else in retail and retail tech alike. And welcome NRF fans to our hot take hashtag NRF Live, the mini-series.
Well, Casey, we are at the last episode in our crossover event with Jeff Foster and his This Week in Innovation podcast. And this is a special final episode to close out the series. Thanks to our sponsor, Avanade, that graciously allowed us to record the whole series in their fabulous lounge space overlooking the main expo floor. For this final episode, Jeff and I were fortunate enough to sit down with Avanade's Greg Jones, their North America lead for retail and consumer goods, and also a friend of ours, to recap what we saw at NRF, talk about the state of startups in retail, which Avanade actually hosted 3 startup showcases during NRF with Microsoft for Startups team and our fellow retail Avenger, Shish Sridhar. And 2 of our podcast guests came from those showcases, the 1M Robotics and Z-Blocks. They're both part of that program. And of course, I know it's always near and dear to your heart anytime we talk about retail startups.
It is. So a big shout out to Avanade for supporting and sponsoring this crossover. And just wow. I mean, this whole series has been a celebration of retail and just showing us what NRF was all about this year.
Absolutely. And, this discussion with Greg really highlights what I think so many in the media have been missing about the retail industry, that is really a more positive outlook about what's to come in 2023. We hear about all the negative things that get reported, but that wasn't really the mood at this NRF. And we talk about that in this episode. Positive in the sense that even with all of those headwinds that are out there and global problems and everything, retail still finds a way to innovate and finds a way to deliver great customer and employee experiences.
Yes. And the customer experiences always begin with the employee experience. And often that starts with what software they're using or lack thereof. So
Exactly.
Really enjoy this highlight.
Absolutely. Well, let's dive right in and listen to our conversation with Greg Jones from Avanade. Hello, everybody. We are back to wrap up our NRF Live series that Jeff Foster and I have been fortunate enough to speak to a number of fascinating folks during NRF week. And graciously, as Avanade has sponsored us and gave us the space and facility to record, we're coming back after the show now with Greg Jones from Avanade to kind of talk through what stood out to us, what were some of the highlights of the show, and see where we think things are going to go next. So without any further delay, Jeff, what do you say we just dive in?
Absolutely. Let's get it going.
All right. So pleased to welcome Greg Jones from Avanade. Greg, why don't you introduce yourself, kick us off and tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing at Avanade.
Yeah, absolutely, Ricardo. And look, thank you both, Ricardo and Jeff, for the time and the opportunity. I think we're all really excited collectively on NRF. It was obviously great to be back in person and great to be able to have this conversation as well, because there's a lot that got learnt and a lot that kind of excited the industry as well. So a bit of background. So Greg Jones, I run and look after the North America practice here at Avanade for retail and consumer goods. Avanade, for those who don't know, was a joint founded organization back in 2000 between Accenture and Microsoft. We're a global system integrator, over 60,000 people globally, but very focused around industry as a whole. And retail is one of the priority industries that we have. And that's what we definitely brought together as part of Avanade and at NRF, was the opportunity to be able to showcase some of the capabilities that Avanade is delivering. So bringing all of our expertise together. So I've been with Avanade for 2 years. And prior to that, I was with Microsoft as part of the global retail team, looking after everything from partner ecosystem and business strategy for quite a number of years. And again, pleased to be able to be here with yourself and Jeff.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, Greg. What do you give us your sense of, obviously, Avanade, you guys had a number of really great activities during NRF. You had the breakfast session at the beginning of the week. You had some startup showcases happening with Microsoft for Startups. Why don't you give us what you think are some of the highlights from the various activities, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about what things stood out to all of us from the overall from NRF.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was going to say, yeah, we did a lot to be able to really bring, the view of retail in the current climate as well. So we needed to make sure that, we were coming to the event with capabilities, and some of the demos that we had that were very focused around helping organizations, get the value out of what they've got now as well. And I would say that, retailers as a whole, have never faced such a volume of or a variety of challenges as well that's facing them at the moment. But it's also facing and making some tough decisions. That was part of the conversations that happened throughout NRF, is that people are there to look at where they need to be able to pivot and how to be able to pivot their organizations, during the current climate at the moment as well. And I would say, through the discussions, there were two primary challenges that were being discussed, which is the need to control costs, and also to protect margins, and the need to be a responsible retailer as well, and around doing what matters in the current climate, being able to still ensure that delight experience for the customers. But there's also an element of the employee experience that really came through as part of the discussions that we had, in particular a breakfast panel that we did during NRF, where we had the chief HR officer from Northern Tools and Equipment very much talking about the importance of the employees and how through enabling those employees can continue that delight experience and be that continuation of that brand engagement with customers as well. So it was actually really interesting on some of the elements that came together. The way that we really came to NRF was to be able to look at what we call it reignite physical retail, which is really bringing that physical retail and obviously the online worlds together, and how to be able to look at all aspects of that journey, or what we're calling the customer as the only channel, is how to be able to engage with that customer through all aspects of the channel of engagement, how we can help retailers in being able to do that. Yeah, it was great to be able to see the messaging landed very well with the client conversations. The discussions that we had with customers was very on point in regards to the challenges that they're facing and how we can definitely help. But there are also some surprises out there as well that we can talk about a little bit later as well.
I'm curious in some of your client conversations. So some of the things I heard fairly consistently, and you mentioned it at the beginning too, is this idea of you're trying to find and identify the things I need to do as a retailer to make my operations more efficient, to kind of lower that cost basis while still doing it in a way that's not going to impact my overall customer experience, particularly in store. Now that I think we can all agree that we can put to bed all those worries about stores going away and been a narrative for so long that we can now all safely point to and say, yeah, that's not happening. Stores are here to stay. But was that a consistent theme that you heard as well?
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously the stores aren't going away at all. We've all heard that the business models of stores have to change, and that's no secret. You're looking at new store designs that are coming out across the globe of how to be able to provide more of a curated experience, and that in itself, I think, is just part of the new business model that, retailers are having to be able to make sure that the stores are, the showroom. It's that way to be able to bridge their online channels with the physical channels. And that pivot, I think, definitely has been occurring more so post-pandemic as well. And I think that's where people are now starting to see we need best of both worlds. We're seeing Nike as an example that are very much looking at redefining their store environments through that whole direct-to-consumer engagement and element that they're driving for as well, which I think is super, super cool in regards to what they're doing. And it's almost like, if I look at the Nike store in New York, it's a destination. You walk past there and people are there to experience that whole engagement point. But I think it also came back to some of the fundamentals as well, where retailers are sitting there going, we've invested in a lot of technology over the course of the last 3 years. Are we getting the most out of that as well? And that was a pivot of the discussion on kind of doing more with less, or doing more with the investments that they've already made, and looking at ways to be able to really squeeze the most out of those investments. Is there opportunities to be able to consolidate? Absolutely. But it's also a way to be able to look at maximizing the investments that they've already put into place. So I'd be definitely curious, like Jeff and Ricardo, I mean, from discussions that you had with customers, did you look at that or hear in regards to getting more out of the investments that people have made to be able to reach the goals that they wanted to achieve?
You want to go first,
Yep.
Ricardo, or you want me?
Yeah, sure. I mean, from my perspective, I definitely heard quite a bit of that. What do I need to do to extract that benefit, right, from everything I've already invested in? I kind of I tended to hear that coupled with this recognition that my goal isn't to cut a cost, right? My goal was to gain efficiency, to strengthen some aspect of an operation that perhaps when we first created this new capability, the goal at the time was to just get that capability out there with not too much regard for how expensive was it going to be to deliver it. And now was the time to figure out, well, now that I've delivered it and we have this customer facing capability, how can we do it in a more efficient way? And if that means I have to invest in another supplemental capability on top of that to help facilitate the overall reduction of the operational cost long term, then that's okay. There was some recognition that that might be necessary, but I think I saw as a trend that if there are a lot of really interesting new technologies out there, they were being viewed with the lens of how does that make me more efficient or how does that make my operation better, versus where the last NRF I remember the thought would have been, wow, that's really neat. How well received is that going to be if my customer sees that? Then therefore I need to have it.
Yeah.
Which is a very different lens.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the, as I said, one of the surprises that I saw and certainly heard across the entire show floor was, yeah, leading into NRF, there was certainly, there was, amplification. There was obviously the buzz that was happening about the metaverse. How is that being applied? Retailers that are looking at that, brands that are definitely jumping in and exploring and engaging with the metaverse for their particular brand. But I was actually quite surprised that, I didn't see walking into the Javits Center. I remember the days where, AI was the big topic, and you'd have banners all over the place in regards to AI this and, AI empowered retail and, what AI can do for you and your customer experiences, or the wonderful world of big data. It was kind of all over the place. Walking into the Javits Center, didn't see anything in regards to metaverse. Now, and then visually, just in regards to, it wasn't necessarily there as a, welcome to, or the metaverse is changing the world and enabling. And I think part of that is the fact of people are still not on the edge, but they're still looking at how that can be applied and what that is going to do for their engagement. But also from an operational standpoint, given the current climate as well, is around, do we look at supply chain visibility and inventory, our employees? How do we gain control of our entire data estate? Do we do that, or we do metaverse? It's kind of, there's an interesting kind of like almost like an internal debate that people like. It's there, understand it. It's kind of there's a new way to engage, but there's other things that we need to be focusing on as well.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. Is in the first 3/4 of my career, I was about adoption. My Gartner and IHL days. Where are we in adoption? And it's interesting kind of even talking about the M word metaverse. A lot of analysts that I'm friends with are going back and forth and are saying, well, I didn't see any metaverse stuff there. Well, you should have went up to the innovation lab because there was plenty of that there. But the thing was, and I agree with you 100%, Greg, I don't think I saw the word metaverse once, but there was all the components of it, which is why I'm really such a big fan. And I got this first from Microsoft, the term immersive commerce, because it's not right now. I don't think anybody's looking to buy a metaverse solution, but boy, you sure can find some very interesting stuff around holograms. You can definitely find a lot around 3D objects. You can definitely find some stuff around augmented reality. Not so much on the goggles yet. I kind of get that. I mean, I don't know that I see that, but boy, when you start thinking about what Ulta's doing with Roblox, what not Home Depot, Walmart is doing with Roblox, you're really seeing that immersive commerce pieces begin to pick up. And it's almost like there's a maturation in how we message, how the vendor community messages this stuff. And it really, I didn't see, it just felt like a very mature approach to the show. Just nothing like screamy. There's a great example I'll use. It's one of your competitors. So I'll be nice and not use it. But there was one, a few years ago, there was like a certain signage that was everywhere. And it was like, I don't know. It seemed kind of silly. So I just felt like it was a really, really mature way of going about the business of not just technology adoption, but also the push towards innovation. Definitely on the, in the innovation lab, and definitely in the Microsoft for Startup stuff. I mean, there was some
Yeah.
crazy interesting technology. So
Yeah.
I love that balance. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure my fellow analysts though picked up on that nuance, because they're not chasing innovation. They shouldn't be. They should be worrying about where we are in adoption. And boy, that's going to be a fun thing for us,
Yeah.
some of us to chase, I think, in the next 18 months.
Well, and there's some things I saw too. So I agree too. What Greg said, that you didn't see metaverse being flashed around everywhere like we had in places last year. And I agree with what you said, Jeff, that there are a lot of components about it spread out and lots of different places. And I kind of perceive that as some of these components have useful things you can do with them today, whereas I think everyone is still kind of figuring out what's my truly useful revenue generating thing that I can do that's customer facing in the metaverse that I know is going to work with the customers I have, or what can I do that's going to attract new customers for me. And I think everyone's still kind of figuring that part out. But there's some things, I saw people thinking about and talking about digital twins, which I view that as a metaverse use case.
Absolutely.
There's a whole session
I want a
on
digital
that one.
twin. I want me so I can go in and have 2 or 3 people going around the show. That's
so your own digital twin can go and do some interviews, right? And go talk to some startups.
I still wouldn't
I
cover.
think we had a startup about that.
Yeah, there you
that's right.
go. There you go.
That's
and
right.
I still will only
Yeah.
covered about 15 or 20% of the show. I mean, it was unbelievable how complex that show was
Yeah.
to cover. I mean, it was, man, there was so much stuff. And then we haven't even talked about, the stuff that was happening offsite. Really, really, that show is just absolutely maturing and exploding.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of drill into this theme a little bit on what some of those new things were that it may not have been metaverse, but I for example, I still saw some things around Web3 that I think were pretty interesting, particularly connecting with loyalty programs, which I see as a trending thing, and then also saw some things around micro fulfillment that I think continues to be maybe isn't a new topic to talk about, but still I would consider it new in terms of adoption. To your point, Jeff, where are things in adoption and ways to apply it. So I think a lot of interesting things in pockets and different areas, and particularly with what different startups were showing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I'll jump onto the startup side. So as you both know, throughout the course of NRF, every day we in partnership with Microsoft brought together a number of very interesting and unique startups to be able to. It was more of an opportunity to be able to just share what are some of the things and organizations that are out there, the problems that they're trying to solve. And the way that we broke it up was, again, very intentional. So the first day that we focused around what we were calling the intelligent store. So really looking at the, kind of what is happening around that physical store element. Yeah, there were some interesting startups with the likes of shopping, right? So shopping, it was more of a smart cart, frictionless shopping approach where, it's a unit that then mounts onto a shopping cart. You can then pick the product off to the shelf, put that into your basket, transact at the cart itself, bag your products, go and put it into the car, and then you just put the rack back onto the charging station. Again, a cost-effective way to be able to provide that frictionless shopping experience. And then you had others with, if I look at the likes of, Path AI, which is, really starting to look at not just around measuring traffic, but it's also looking at the analytics of that physical world, understanding the shopper behavior within the retail stores, but it's leveraging the infrastructure that's already in place as well. So being, again, cost conscious, but being able to drive and pull value out of what's in the store. And that was a couple that we had on day one. Day two, again, we pivoted around what was happening in the current day. So it was around looking at unified commerce and supply chain. So we had organizations like Next Billion AI, again looking at scale and managing the mapping ecosystem as well, and tackling complex location-based problems and how to be able to use AI as a means to be able to bring geography and scale together to be able to look what was happening. You then start to look at the likes of Pocket, and Pocket themselves is really a sort of a checkout platform that helps businesses access and retain the digital native shoppers globally. And it was quite interesting on the way that they were looking at merchant partners, looking at shelf analytics and being able to bridge that online and in-store experience. But the day three was the one that kind of, I think, blew people's minds a little bit. And Jeff, it comes back onto what we were all saying about metaverse. We did have a session on metaverse, but it was to be able to bring different elements. You start to look at this, this commerce approach. You start to look at how different types of capabilities are being enabled. Now, one of the startups that we had there was phenomenal. I mean, you could have had an hour just with this particular startup called Deep Brain AI, and they're all about conversational artificial intelligence. And they were talking about stories of in the Asia region where there is a mainstream news program that instead of having a physical host hosting the TV program, it's a conversational AI and it's an AI driven engagement that happens, and then radio stations that are we're on a podcast, but it was kind of scary when they started to talk about again this conversational AI and how that could become the voice of radio moving forward. And that was one where it was good to have it sort of on the last day, because I think people were just like, oh, last day, we're sitting down, that's all good. And then there was all of a sudden this, well, hang on a minute, what are you talking about? And it was kind of, it created a lot of great follow-on discussions as well. But it was kind of, again, there was an opportunity to be able to bring something new to customers and anybody that was able to come past our showcase.
Yeah, that was the one with the Howie Mandel avatar, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were up in the innovation zone. That's actually real. I mean, Howie is sending his I don't know, what do you call it, his AI out, and you can license that, and for a cheaper rate than having Howie come out personally. I was shocked by that. I mean, not shocked. That's probably too strong, but again, that innovation versus adoption. Wow, you now can take pounds, dollars, euro, rupee, and say there is money being generated, and obviously it's just, I mean, that's such a crazy scenario how that's going to play itself out. Feels really super metaversey to me. So
yeah,
it's just. The adoption is there. Not just the innovation, but the adoption. When you can start going in stuff that I don't think that was even around 3 years ago, or at least before COVID. And now you can say, wow, there's money being generated here. That is rapid adoption. That rapid innovation followed by, I think, pretty significant adoption coming forward. So a lot of stuff happening there.
And I think, to be honest, Jeff, that itself is part of the challenge for the industry, right? So as you said, 3 years ago, I don't think any of us would have been having a conversation about, Harvey out there with his AI, and you can purchase that, get him out there speaking and create this kind of character. You've also then to blend that with then the conversations that really bubbled up on the last day of NRF around ChatGPT. Right. And you start to look at, okay, as a retailer, what do we do with this? How do we consume it? How does it get applied? And I think collectively, if I look at, the three of us, I think there's an element of how can we help retailers really start to look at how it could be applied in that conversation of responsible retailing. I think there's an element of a good conversation to have around that as well.
Yeah, that one's not going away, because every analyst I've talked to is both intrigued and sweating bullets about that. Since I'm on the other side of my career, I'm like, this sounds great. Let me just have this absorb all this unbelievable amount of information, and then spit out some content and let me edit it, and then just roster's opinion edited or created by ChatGPT and edited by me. And seems fine to me, as long as somebody's sort of validating that. Basically, it's just ghostwriting. So what does that mean for retail? I mean, how are they going to process that? How are they going to absorb that? Man, we're really out on the edge when we're talking about that. And just imagine if by next year, where we've really now spent 6 months, 8 months, 9 months really beginning to live with this and seeing podcasts. I mean, there's a podcaster that's already interviewed the AI and did it live. I mean, it was crazy. And we're only on the earliest edge. So when I look at that, what teams are going to need to do, what retailers are going to need to do, we've always been screaming about, the era of intentional innovation is upon us. Boy, oh boy, that's on steroids now. You live streaming. What are you going to do with live streaming? Are you going to be comfortable having your store associates out there presenting your brand out in all kinds of environments? Are we going to over-engineer that live streaming like we probably would have done 10 years ago? Hopefully not.
But now you'll also have the option that maybe if for your best store associates that do that, right, you could have their digital avatar do the live streaming for them while they're still helping a customer in the store.
I mean, that just
think about it that way.
That's an absolute just taking it next level.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking out on some of the, everyone likes to talk about the customer service use cases, right? Where today it might be, what every consumer probably learns to hate the chatbot on every retailer's site that tries to solve their support questions when they come in as. But now when you have something like a chat GPT trying to solve those, you might actually get meaningful responses, and the consumer won't even realize that they're talking to an AI. If you don't tell them, they're going to get the answers they want and move on. You can think of it in like call center applications. I can think of, I think to me, those demos that we saw from like the Deep Brain AI, there's got to be an example there of whether it's Howie or some other celebrity type, pseudo endorsement, right? Standing in a store window, kind of waving to the people coming by, offering to tell them about what great new thing is inside the store, and to get people inside when it's not really them, it's their digital avatar.
Yeah, it's going to be really it's exciting. I think it is exciting in regards to how it can be applied. I mean, talking to my 17-year-old son about ChatGPT, and he was just like, "Yeah, it's like I've known about this for months." I'm like, "Okay, good."
Yeah,
you might want to. You might have wanted to share that with me before I stepped foot at NRF, but that's a different story.
And the second question is, how much of your homework has that done for you? Just
has it done for you?
Yes, there is that subliminal sort of, okay, let me relook at your grades and see if there was a spike in improvement. Now I know why, but no, he's a great kid.
So Greg, let me ask you this to kind of last thing here to close this out. With all these things we just talked about based on what we saw at NRF, what's your take on where retailers go next this year coming out of NRF?
Yeah, look, I think it's sort of coming out on the back of NRF. I would say that there's the consistent excitement that is still there in regards to the market opportunity. Yes, their discretionary spend is starting to definitely slow down, and we see that in all the reports and discussions that we're having with our customers. I think really for me, it's kind of the challenge and the opportunity is really just that bridge. How to be able to bridge that physical and digital worlds together. Really unleash that customer experience. And the other part of it is really around the data estate. The one thing, and certainly one of the key themes that came up and through the discussions that we had, is what to do with this vast amount of data that has, I would say, significantly grown over the last 3 years, just given the new market opportunities, new direction that retailers have had to go. And there's a need and a desire to look at, how do we try and get control of what we have as part of the data estate? Is there the opportunity to be able to monetize that as well? So if I really look at sort of the three themes, data monetization, how to be able to do that, enable and sort of that bridge that physical and digital worlds and drive the most out of the investments that organizations have had, but keeping that in a responsible way. And I think the employees, we're having a lot of discussions with retailers in regards to their employee enablement and how to be able to do that in a responsible way as well. We want to make sure that the associates are being given access to the right information to make them more informed and to be able to deliver a better customer experience. But we also want to make sure that it doesn't open up, kind of the other can of worms in regards to, on the clock and off the clock and hourly employee discussions. And I know that Microsoft, is very focused on around that, on the whole enablement and controlling access. I would say it's still an exciting time, and I just know that we're all in this together to be able to help retailers through where we are and how to be able to get on the other side as well. And as I'm looking forward to NRF 2024. I think it's going to be exciting, but it's going to be a journey over the course of the next few months, just on how people are pivoting over the course of the economy as well.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to delve in a little bit on one of the points you made that we didn't talk as much about earlier, but that I caught it in some key moments around the show, maybe not necessarily always a big focus, but certainly lots of people talking about is, what kinds of things can be done that focus on supporting those store associates and frontline workers in the store. What's the technology doing to serve them? It's not a discussion, I believe, anymore about a technology that's replacing people. It's what's the technology that's helping the people that are there. Partly knowing that in most cases, retailers aren't expecting to hire more people in the stores. There's still an issue of where do I find enough labor to run the store? And so there's that element of needing the technology. But I think there's now a renewed, I'll say, well, I don't know if I should say new or renewed, but there's an interest for sure now in leveraging the technology to make that store environment a better work environment overall for the team that's there, and doing it in a way that causes people to want to do that job. I think that's a key differentiator from what I've seen in past years.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Almost the point where it was noticeable, I thought, where I'm trying to think back over the years was the discussion around the employee as predominant, and I just don't think it was. And I just wonder if that maybe is a kind of a fallout from COVID, where we really saw how critical our
Mhm.
supply chains are. We saw how important people in those supply chains are, how important it is to have a working store, physical store in our neighborhoods when it came time to get milk or eggs or whatever. I don't know. It just felt like a really interesting. It just felt like a better show. It just felt like a better
Yeah.
experience. It just felt like
Yeah.
everyone was,
Yeah.
I don't know. And if we got that out of that mess we've all been through the last 3 years, I wouldn't say it was worth it, but at least it's something positive that came out of all that train wreck.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I look at NRF as being, it's the big show, absolutely. But this year was the big reunion. It was really that opportunity for people to be able to get back together in person, catch up, have a laugh, get
Mhm.
and just reconnect. And I think it was absolutely, it was energizing to be able to be in that environment. But as I said, I
Mhm.
think it was very much the big industry reunion is really
Yeah.
what NRF was about this year.
Yeah.
That's a good
Yeah.
phrase.
I even kind of think of it almost like a big reset moment, and that everybody had been in sort of a mode the last few years because of COVID, and this was almost felt like finally it was the one industry moment that let everybody get past that mood
Yeah.
and to move to now we're ready to move on to what we're going to do to make this industry better. And I would probably sum it up as much more of a collaborative note from an industry point of view on how we're going to do this than in past years, even pre-COVID, where it wasn't about what am I going to do, it was more about what are we going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very much so.
I like that.
That's a good
I like
point.
that.
All right, Jeff, any last thoughts?
Oh man, it's so exciting. All that, I was one of the 6,000 that was there last year, and it just broke my heart. And I just thought, my gosh, are we watching the end of retail? And of course, remember that was all the talk about, buy online, pick it up store, awesome thing. But then, do we even need this and all the last mile stuff? And I'm thinking, no, we're people, we're humans. We want to gather. And when I walked in, well, starting with VIP awards on Friday night, and then all the way through, get on the plane Wednesday afternoon, it just was all about re-engagement, return, the celebration of the human experience, which I think retail probably more so than any industry really captures that. And I haven't felt as good coming out of a trade show probably ever, actually. It's an exciting time ahead. There's tons of stuff for us analysts to talk about. There's a bunch of stuff for us focusing on innovation to talk about. And then there's just this tremendous celebration of what we can do as a society and as a group and an industry. I'm really, really excited about the 2023.
Yeah.
Yep. Greg, any final thoughts?
I was going to say similar to Jeff, like excited about 2023. NRF it's really kind of it's the Super Bowl of the industry, and it brings everybody together. And there's the excitement around it. What I am definitely looking forward to is again just the continuation of the conversations. And it's the industry is small. We know it's a very small world, and keen to be able to learn as we're all going through this year, just in regards to where we need to be able to pivot and how we need to be able to partner. And really looking forward to a successful 2023 together and celebrating great successes in the 2024 at NRF as well.
Oh, I agree with that. Fantastic. Well, Greg, thank you so much for joining us for this NRF recap. I know we all attempted to do this live while we were still in person during the show and had, let's say, a few technical glitches that maybe prevented us from successfully completing that.
One slight one.
Yeah, just one slight
I have an important
uncooperative
one.
microphone that prevented us from capturing all that gold commentary that we knew we were going to get. But that aside,
apparently there's some technology that can help with that.
Jeff, we have to look into that for sure.
Oh man,
for the next time.
All good.
All good. Well, thanks again, Greg, for joining us, and thanks to Avanade for having sponsored us and given us the ability to take on this series during NRF by letting us use your space,
Pleasure.
which was such a fabulous spot for us to capture some golden moments with a number of really interesting people and that everybody's been able to enjoy in this series.
I was going to say you're always welcome.
Thanks very much. All right, Jeff, I think that is a wrap for this.
Well, and thank you, Ricardo, for letting me shadow you throughout this whole crazy week. I mean, we've talked about doing this sort of a thing for a while, and man, what a crazy deal. What an awesome, crazy, fun way to cover NRF 2023. I think we captured some good memories, and I cannot wait for what you and I have planned for going forward.
Absolutely. Quick little hint dropping there for you dropping for what's yet to come. So we'll
the term
keep
is
those listeners and viewers anxiously awaiting.
The term is foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. There you go. All right. And with that, we will sign off. Thanks everyone for joining us.
See ya.
Thanks.
Welcome back, everyone. So, Ricardo, you have to give us some more details. What happened to the original recording of this conversation? I understand there's a story.
Yeah, there is. And as much as I'd like to find someone else to blame, I can honestly say I have no idea what happened. So, Jeff and I set up all the mics, all our equipment, just like we always did in the Avanade Lounge for each of these sessions. But somehow, despite, all the sound checks we did when we start, before we hit that record button, when I went back to listen to that recording that I got on my Zoom PodTrack recorder, it turned out that Greg's mic was somehow just not functioning at all. And we only had his voice spill over onto the other two mics. So he sounded totally faint and distant. It just was not a useful recording at all. So Jeff and I had to go back to Greg after we all got back from NRF, and we set up a remote recording session to wrap up the series. So, of course, that meant technically we didn't record this last one in the crossover series live and in person at NRF like the others in the series. But in exchange, we get to show off more video podcasts this season with this one.
Yeah, and hopefully some of our listeners became viewers on YouTube for this one. I also really love how you guys wrapped it up by talking about the energy and emotion that everyone brought with them at NRF this year. I was there, I felt it, and I don't think I've ever seen that much at NRF. Have you?
No, I mean, that's 100%. I mean, that's so true. This was a really unique NRF. I have to give a special shout out to Jeff Roster, too, for joining me on this little on-site recording adventure. We honestly didn't know if we'd be able to pull this off. For both of us, it was our first true, legitimate attempt at some live on-site in-person recording at an event like this. I got to say, we've all been so used to doing this remotely in our podcast and looking at each other like we are right now in a little square on our screens. It was just so amazing to have the chance to do this in person. It really brings a whole new feel to the podcast. Absolutely.
I know I really enjoyed listening and watching these. I hope our show listeners and viewers did too. And I adore what Greg mentioned Avanade is doing with those startup showcases. It's just, I feel it's really important at NRF. So now I have to ask, were you and Jeff hinting at the end there? Are we able to say something here about what's to come?
Well, I think we're going to have to keep listeners in suspense on this one for a little bit longer, but let's just say this won't be the last time you see our two podcasts team up. In fact, we may be doing something even bigger next time. So just stay tuned. Keep listening to the show. Keep listening to our show. Keep listening to Jeff's This Week in Innovation so you don't miss out.
Fine. Keep everyone in suspense. I know it's worth it. And I'm going to give one last shout out to Avanade. We can't say enough about how grateful we are for you providing a space for you and Jeff and sponsoring this series for us. Thank you, Avanade. And I do also want to thank Jeff again. He's just absolutely awesome to work with and at this. I wish I could have joined you guys for those recordings, but as you know, NRF and startup life,
life happens.
Got to divide and conquer.
That's right.
And one final thank you to Sheesh for helping us connect with M Robotics and Z Blocks. They're doing incredible things.
I totally agree. And with that, Casey, this crossover event is a wrap.
If you enjoyed our show, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember to smash that subscribe button in your favorite podcast player so you don't miss a minute. Want to know more about what we talked about today? Take a look at the show notes and handy links for more deets. I'm your co-host, Casey Golden.
And if you'd like to connect with us, follow us on Twitter at KCC Golden and Ricardo_Belmar, or find us on LinkedIn. Be sure and follow the show on Twitter at Retail Razor, on LinkedIn, and on our YouTube channel for the latest updates and content. I'm your host, Ricardo Belmar.
Thanks for joining us.
And remember, there's never been a better time to be in retail if you cut through the clutter. Until next time, this is the Retail Razor Show.